Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Swiswiki. Coming up.
But it all depends on how prepared the communities will be. We don't want to force them,
Independents are on the minds for some in Tokelau. Also,
the Prime Minister maintains that it's not an operational law, it's something that is rather symbolic.
Papua New Guinea Parliament declares Christian identity and making Solomon Islands safe. Tokelau is gearing up for a potential third referendum on self-determination. It's fast approaching the 100th anniversary of its status as a non-self-governing territory of New Zealand. It still takes more than a day to reach Tokelau by boats from Samoa, and there is no airline despite the UN saying its people should be able to enjoy the same basic human rights as others in New Zealand. Lydia Lewis reports.
A teary-eyed Lupe Josephine Louis wants independence for Tokelau.
My hopes are Tokelau to be independent one day.
She serves as Nukunonu's Women's Whatupaipai or Women's Committee representative. For Ms. Louis, education is the path to self-determination.
That will lead us to self-determination if we are well educated for our people and for our island.
Tokelau is made up of 3 atolls. There's no airline and it takes more than a day to reach by boat from Samoa. Leaders want residents to decide what the isolated territory's relationship with New Zealand will look like in the future. Ulua Tokelau, or head of state, Alapati Tavite, says plans are underway to hold community consultation about the timing and shape of a referendum.
Once the consultation, the community will decide, okay, we are ready now to make the referendum.
Tokelau voted against becoming self-governing in free association with New Zealand like the Cook Islands and Niue in 2006 and 2007. After the failure of both referendums by slim margins, a highly respected former Ulua Tokelau, Kelihiano Kalolo, says a tailored approach is needed.
I don't think we can take the same path as the Niue, so we need to come up with something Tokelauan.
So when will it be and what will the question be? Alapati Tavite says that's up to the community to decide.
It all depends on the communities. I won't be in a position to say, okay, let's target for. Of course, we'll put the target there, but it all depends on how prepared the communities will be. We don't want to force them, by going through a vote that they don't understand.
There are a number of constraints with Tokelau's current political status, one being funding to fight the impacts of climate change. Alapati Tavite says the low-lying atolls are particularly vulnerable to rising sea levels.
You got to build the high houses because of the sea coming through the island, relating to the sea level rising. The sea walls, you need to build better sea walls to protect the water from coming in.
He says while New Zealand supports Tokelauans who are New Zealand citizens, the island nation wants to look further afield for assistance.
It's not to that level where we would like to. The contribution from global fundings, international funding, compared to what the other Pacific islands are receiving, it's not comparable to what New Zealand is providing. So it's good that the New Zealand is providing to some extent, but I think we need to tap onto other resources.
Even facing the prospect of the sea swallowing up land, Ms. Louis is rooted in Tokelau's rich culture and has a message for the next generation of staunch Tokelauans.
There's a Lord, we all pray that He give us the courage, give us the courage to develop our land. We would never go anywhere. This is where we belong. This is where we will live.
A spokesperson from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Aotearoa says Tokelau has a number of climate-related projects, such as shelters and coastal defences in the pipeline, and New Zealand stands ready to support it with this development in the coming years. The New Zealand government says self-determination is a decision for the people of Tokelau.
The autonomous Bougainville government's minister in charge of implementing independence, Ezekiel Massat, says the region is demanding more certainty on the issue. A group known as the Leaders Consultation Forum has now set the 1st of September 2027 as Independence Day for Bougainville. Don Wiseman has more.
The forum, which Mr Massat himself set up, is comprised of people from across the spectrum in Bougainville. It's thrown down the gauntlet to the Papua New Guinea government to show its concern at the lack of pace in moving forward on the independence issue. It's now 5.5 years since a binding referendum on independence, part of the 2001 peace agreement, in which 97.7% of Bougainvilleans voted for independence. Since then, little progress has been made. Mr Massat says there are key events coming up, so he informed the forum, which then put out the statement setting the independence dates.
Now, many things have happened. The constitution being done up, that will eventually go to the body that's called the Constituent Assembly. The moderation process is also a matter that commences next week. We've got this year the elections, general elections for ABG. And consequently, I felt there was a need for myself to brief the consultation team.
Both sides last year agreed to bring in former New Zealand Governor-General Sir Jerry Mataparai as a moderator to try and resolve issues around the tabling of the referendum document in the PNG Parliament. The present situation is PNG's Bougainville Affairs Minister, Manasseh Makiba, wants an absolute majority of MPs to support the tabling, but Mr Massat says it should just be a simple majority. Next week, a moderation consultation aimed at solving this is being held.
It is time that on the eve of the moderation process, that the national government and the whole world is informed of the people's intentions to now provide a specific date, that being the 1st of September 2027.
Mr Massat says that date is consistent with what the two governments have agreed upon, that there be a political solution no later than 2027.
It comes as a surprise to some people. I say there's no surprises. The referendum results are well known. It's 97.7% on independence. It is well known that there is an impasse on the sessional order. It is well known that when the moderator traveled last couple of months to Bougainville, this was the message that he got from the people of Bougainville. So while some may express a surprise, I'm not surprised. I think it's a natural progression of what's happening on Bougainville.
He says the people of Bougainville want more certainty over the independence agenda. There's been no reaction from the PNG government to the forum statement, but previously Prime Minister James Marape has talked about the need for Bougainville to be economically strong before independence. Presently, the region is heavily reliant on Port Moresby to fund its services. In the PNG Parliament, the Bougainville Affairs Minister, Manasseh Makiba, was asked why there's been a delay in tabling the referendum results.
Madam Speaker, the reason why the referendum result has not been brought quickly in Parliament is simply because the consultation is still in progress. So as and when the international mediator completes its report and findings, they will be presented to Parliament together with the referendum result. And we are hoping that the international mediator will complete its report before end of July this year.
Meanwhile, a former Bougainville regional MP in the PNG Parliament says the announcement of an independence date seems premature. Joe Lira doubts whether there's been enough consultation and negotiation. He says before independence can be agreed to, Bougainville needs to show it's ready from a nation-building perspective.
Not just from that referendum result perspective. To me, both these two sides should balance, synchronize. We should be ready financially. We should be ready in the pillars of nation building, which is government, people, public service, private sector, economy, education, all these areas. So the decision they've made it without even consulting the people. The people don't know. Even me, I didn't know.
Papua New Guinea's parliament has passed a constitutional amendment formally recognising the nation as a Christian country. It passed with an overwhelming majority of 80 votes in favour and only 4 against. Our PNG correspondent Scott Whitey told Caleb Fotheringham the Prime Minister has given assurance it will not impede freedom of religion.
The Prime Minister maintains that it's not an operational law. It's something that is rather symbolic and something that will hopefully unite Papua New Guinea under a common goal of sorts. So that's been the narrative that's come out from the Prime Minister's office and from Parliament as of yesterday. So a lot of MPs who voted for it were commending the vote. Then the PM released a statement yesterday reiterating what he said in Parliament.
If it was just symbolic, what's the point in doing it?
I think Papua New Guineans have always identified as Christian. Well, a vast majority of them. A lot of people, if you talk to them, they will say that Papua New Guinea is a Christian country, but it hasn't really been written into the Constitution. And I think for the people who wrote the Constitution, the founding fathers who wrote the Constitution, they were very wary of the possible implications, the negative implications that would come about if they declared it a Christian country in 1975, given all the experiences that were being seen in the decolonization period of the 60s and the 70s and leading into the 80s. So I think in their wisdom, they chose to very carefully state that Papua New Guineans are a spiritual people, but stopped short of actually declaring Papua New Guinea a Christian country.
And were any members of Parliament opposed to this declaration?
A majority of the opposition MPs weren't in Parliament, but 4 members voted against it. I couldn't quite see their faces in Parliament, but four members voted against it.
Has anyone been vocally against this and given reason for being against the declaration?
A few Catholic bishops have come out previously stating that it is not really necessary to declare Papua New Guinea a Christian country within the Constitution. So that's been their opinion. There's a larger number on the other side saying we should be declared a Christian country. Within Parliament itself, seeing the vote yesterday, there were quite a few who were very vocal. One of them's been the member for Yanguru Sausia, Richard Maru, who previously came out and said that I'd vote for a declaration changing the Constitution, declaring Papua New Guinea a Christian country. So that's been the whole thread of discussions around this constitutional change.
I'm sure you're aware, but it's not a completely new conversation for the Pacific. The Cook Islands at the moment, they're actually having the same conversation. And a big opponent to this is the idea of freedom of religion. And at least in the Cook Islands, there have been people saying that it's in conflict with the section of their constitution that allows for freedom of religion. Was this a concern at all with PNG?
Yes, there is a concern, and that was one of the things that the Prime Minister tried to address yesterday when he said that it doesn't impede the freedom of religion that the constitutional is enshrined in the Constitution. The difference with Papua New Guinea is, and then there are very subtle things that need to be addressed here, and recognizes that compared to Fiji, Fiji has had a 200-year experience with different religions. They've become comfortable with that diversity to some extent. Papua New Guinea, the first mosque that was officially opened was in the 80s. We've had a large Baha'i community here in Papua New Guinea and various other smaller religions. We've got a small Buddhist community and all that, but it's not as diverse as you would see in other countries. Personally, I've seen instances of religious violence largely based on ignorance, not because they're politically driven, but because people aren't educated enough to understand the differences in religions and the need to coexist. So that's been one of the key things that have come about over the last 20, 25 years that I've seen. And it needs more discussion, more awareness. And that was, I think, a I've posted several personal opinions of mine saying that this whole discussion needs to be broadened. Even though we've had a consultation, it needs to be broadened so that people understand that we are not living in isolation. We're part of a global community, and the world is not all Christian.
Since 2023, the Halo Trust, an organisation dedicated to clearing landmines, have been in Solomon Islands conducting a survey on the country's airfields, ammunition stores and former military encampments as part of a nationwide assessment of unexploded ordnances left behind by World War II battles on its shores. I spoke with the program manager, Chris Teasdale, about the Halo Trust's work on Solomon Islands.
So the kind of layout we've got here is 26 national staff that was employed from the local communities, and then we've got 4 international staff which are supporting them. This compromises of 4 teams. We've got 2 teams in Honiara conducting non-technical survey and 2 teams out in the Western Province in Munda, which is a big mapping exercise. And the information we're getting together, we're then passing on to the police, which will support them in identifying areas and disposal of items.
As I understand, there's a lack of data with the contamination. So how long will you have to carry out your work in the Solomon Islands to get a better picture of how many unexploded bombs there are on the ground?
With regards to the work we're doing here, we've been here since June 2023, implementing this kind of national survey. We've done a lot of work in Honiara and Munda, but as you appreciate, the whole of the Solomon Islands is hugely vast and logistically challenging. So I can see the teams being here for many years, really, to support the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force. We've still got islands such as Malaita, Tuolagi. We need to go up to Shortlands and up to Choiseul. So there's a lot of areas we need to understand and then implement the teams to conduct this survey.
How are locals able to live in an area that's knowingly contaminated?
I think they've been able to adapt to it over the years. This is an 80-year problem which has just slowly been kind of chipped away at. The Solomon Islands has developed a lot. It's grown a lot. The population's grown. And they've been able to work around that. The work that police are currently doing is exceptional, and they've got good communication, and the police often turn up within a few hours to dispose of items around. So they've kind of self-managed this, but now with the support of the police, it's really kind of pushing forward. And organisations like ourselves, which are educating the Solomon Islanders to kind of adapt or kind of be safe around items they find, is helping a lot.
Do you know when the work that you're carrying out, do you have a fair idea of when that would be completed?
This is what we're trying to understand now with the survey. We've been here for just over 2 years. We've done a lot of work in Honiara, but until we can push out to the islands over the coming months, it's hard to get that kind of timeline. I can easily see this being another 5 years, maybe even 10-year project, but until we fully understand the kind of what we're dealing with, it's going to be hard to put a date on.
Now, earlier you mentioned that the locals, they've self-managed, or they've learned to kind of live with the unexploded bombs. But what's been the response like from community elders towards the Halo Trust?
It's incredibly accepting of us. They really appreciate that, one, that we're employing from the communities, and 2, that we're identifying there is a need there. They're very open. We sit down with the elders. We're very transparent of what we're doing in the communities, and they often identify areas we need to go because the local farmers are working in areas potential construction happened. It's all about gaining information over a number of years, which they can help us with.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā sui fua.